the majority of you will be using a graphing calculator to do most of your work. Some of you will be using tablets or cell phones, maybe computers, but most of you will have a graphing calculator. The typical graphing calculators are the TI-83 and the TI-84. So I'm going to cover the TI-83, and this is very similar to the TI-84. Now let's say you wanted to go ahead and evaluate the sine function at 20 degrees. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure your calculator is either in degrees or radians. So you got to pick which one you're going to be working with. So if your angle's in degrees, put your calculator in degrees. If it's in radians, put your calculator in radians. How do we do that? Well, there's a mode button up here right next to the yellow key. So I'll click that mode button. Oops. There we go. And it'll get into a screen that looks like this. The third option down gives you a choice between radians and degrees. So let's say we want to work in degrees. Well, we use these arrow keys here, slide back and forth. When we get over to degrees, we hit enter. Now notice that it'll unhighlight the radian and highlight the degree. So now our calculator is in degrees. So let's exit out of this and go back to the main screen by hitting second and mode, and that's going to allow us to quit. We're back to our main screen. Now if I want to evaluate the sine of an angle, let's say 20 degrees, I click the sine key, which is down here, and then I type 20. Now the calculator recognizes that 20 as a degree, not a radian, because we're in degrees for our mode. So I'll hit enter, and it gives me 0.34. So that tells me if I draw out a 20-degree angle on the unit circle, it'll have a height value of about 3.5 tenths, or 34 hundredths. Now watch how I'm going to get a different answer here. If I click and I put this in radians, and now I type sine 20, this answer is the sine value at 20 radians, not 20 degrees. So notice I have a different answer. Okay. So odds are, if you're making a mistake using your calculator, the first place to check is your mode. So again, one more time, hit the mode key, go down, change whether you're in degrees or radians. Okay, so let's say I want to work in radians. And now let's say I want to evaluate the sine of 3 pi over 2. So I go 3. Now if I want to, I can type in 3 times 3.14. So 3 times 3.14 divided by 2. That's the same as 3 pi over 2. The other way I could do this is by hitting sine, and this is a more accurate way because we're not using the estimate there for pi. We can click 3, and now above your caret key here is the pi symbol. So if I hit second and this caret key, I get 3 pi and divide it by 2. Now if I hit enter, I'll get a more exact value, and that is precise, because if you go 3/4 of a revolution around the circle, you'll be at -1 for your height value. Notice that I didn't have to put 3 pi in parentheses. So what I'm saying is this: I didn't have to go like this, because the order of operations is going to work left to right. So it's going to take 3 multiplied by pi first, and then divide that answer by 2. So I'll get the same answer here. Okay, and that's pretty much the basics of it. So just make sure that when you're working with your calculator, it's either in degrees or radians, depending on what your angle's in.